Hello students, in this video now I am going to teach second part of first unit in the microbiology, that is regarding the bacterial spore. Already in the first part of first unit I have taught you about the bacterial structure. Right? Now I am going to teach bacterial spore. The bacterial spores are highly resistant. Bacterial spores are highly resistant dormant structure. Highly resistant dormant structure formed in response to adverse environmental condition. See, the bacterial spores are formed when the adverse environmental conditions happen to the bacteria. At that time, the bacterial spores will be formed. They help in the survival of organism during adverse environmental condition. For example, if the bacteria exposes to the heat, if the bacteria exposes to the excessive temperature or a heat, the bacterial spores will get activated and it will protect the bacteria. So only we will call the bacterial spores are highly resistant and dormant structure. When the favorable conditions present, like availability of water, appropriate nutrients, the spore germination occurs from the vegetative cells of pathogenic bacteria. When there will be a favorable conditions are there, like availability of water, appropriate nutrient is there, means the spore germination will take place in the bacteria. From where the spore germination takes place means from the vegetative cell. And this bacterial spore does not have a role in the reproduction. The spore formation is called as sporulation, which occurs when the nutrients such as source of carbon and nitrogen are depleted. Bacterial spores are highly resistant to the heat, dehydration, radiation and even chemicals. So only when there is a bacterial spore, the bacteria will not die, because the spore is highly resistant to the heat, dehydration, radiation and chemicals. Even though when we are trying to kill the bacteria by using a radiation and chemical and heat, the bacterial spore will not die, because the bacterial spore is highly resistant. See, this is the structure of bacterial spore. Structure of bacterial spore. You can observe. See, there are several layers are there. See, this is called as core, and this is a cytoplasmic membrane. This is the spore wall, and this is called as cortex, and this is keratin spore coat. See, the spore can survive adverse condition for years. Okay, even for the years the spore can survive. The spore core contains a DNA, ribosome and glycolytic enzyme. But this DNA and ribosomes are from the vegetative cell. The spore wall will be normal peptidoglycan. The spore wall is made up of peptidoglycan. And the cortex, a thick layer of less cross-linked peptidoglycans are present in the cortex. And keratin spore coat is made up of with a protein. This is a structure of bacterial spore. See, the center of the bacterial spore called as spore core. which contains a DNA, ribosome and glycolytic enzyme. This DNA is from the vegetative cell. Next is, it is surrounded by a layer called as cytoplasmic membrane, and the cytoplasmic membrane is surrounded by a spore wall which is made up of normal peptidoglycan. And next is cortex layer. It is a very thick layer. You can observe it is a very thick layer. It is made up of cross-linked peptidoglycan. And outermost layer of a bacterial spore is keratin spore coat, which is made up of protein, keratin. An endospore is structurally and chemically more complex than the vegetative cell. An endospore is structurally and chemically it is a more complex than the vegetative cell. It contains more layers than vegetative cell. Resistance of bacterial spores may be mediated by dipiclonic acid, a calcium ion, shelter found only in the spores. What are the constituents of bacterial spores means? A thick keratin-like coat, peptidoglycan, cell membrane, a small amount of cytoplasm, a very little water and bacterial DNA. These are the constituents of bacterial spore. Next, moving on to the classification of spores. Based on the position of spore, the spores are classified as follows. Based upon the position. Central spore. Central spore means the endospores located in the middle of the bacterium. The endospore located in the middle of the bacterium, we will call it as a central spore. Terminal spore. The endospore located at the end of the bacterium. Terminal. Terminal means end. So, at the end of the bacterium, there will be a endospore. That is called as terminal endospore. Next, subterminal endospores. This subterminal endospores located near end of the bacteria. That is subterminal. Next, based on the shape, the endospores are classified into central or equatorial, giving the bacillus a spindle shape. Central or equatorial, giving the bacillus spindle shape. That is example Clostridium bifurcatus. Clostridium bifurcatus. That is an example of bacteria which contains a spindle shape central spore. Next, a club-shaped subterminal bacillus. Club-shaped subterminal bacillus. The example is Clostridium perfringens. Next is tennis racket shape. Tennis racket shape, that is oval and terminal in position. Example Clostridium tertium. Next, a drumstick appearance and spherical and terminal shape, that is Clostridium tetani. These are the classification of endospore based upon the shape. See, based upon the position, central, terminal, subterminal, and based upon the shape, spindle shape, club shape, tennis racket shape and drumstick appearance, endospores. Next, moving on to the functions of bacterial spore. What is the function of bacterial spore means? The first and foremost function is to protect the bacteria. To protect the bacteria. So, it allows the bacterium to produce a dormant and highly resistant cell to preserve the cell genetic material in times of extreme stress. To protect the genetic material of the bacteria, this bacterial endospores will gives a protection to the genetic material. Next, endospores can survive environmental assault that would normally kills the bacterium. See, the endospores will protect the bacteria from the environmental assaults. Spores protect the bacterial cells. Spores from within the cell contains the entire copy of bacterial genome. These are the functions of bacterial spore. In the question paper, in the exam, if you get a question like a endospore, you have to write a structure. This structure you need to write it and explain the structure. See, how to explain the structure means, the center of the bacteria contains core. You have to write that endospore core, which contains the DNA of bacteria, and surrounding the core cytoplasmic membrane is there, and surrounding the cytoplasmic membrane a spore wall is present, and that spore wall is made up of peptidoglycan. Surrounding the spore wall, cortex is present. A cortex layer is the thickest layer formed by cross-linked peptidoglycan, and the outermost layer of the endospore is called as keratin spore coat, which is made up of protein called as keratin. And you can write the constituents of bacterial spore and classification of spore based upon the position and based upon the shape. Next, functions of the bacterial spore you need to write. By this, the bacterial spore will be completed. I hope all of you have been understand the topic. Thanking you.